Hey, good morning, Spout Springs Church. It's good to see you this morning. Don't everybody speak up at once. I am preaching today. Steve is fine. He's all right. Steve, where are you? Are you? Oh, there he is. Okay, good. That was an inside joke. He's doing fine, but every now and again he throws me a bone and lets me get up here and speak. And we're going to be continuing with our series on tattoos. And basically, that is a series about these Bible verses that people love to gravitate towards, but very often they do it so quickly that they don't really get the full context and meaning of the verse. They look great in a tattoo, they look great in a greeting card, but they haven't taken the time to really study them. Before we dive into that, can I just take a moment and just ask, so are y'all cool if this morning's teaching is just COVID-19 free? Can we just not just kind of let that go? And I mean, maybe I should comment with my extensive history in immunology and essential oils, but I think if we just kind of let that go for the next half hour, will y'all be good with that? Good. So let's talk about swine flu. This is what happened. It was about 10 years ago. I was directing a camp, and this is not too far from here, about an hour from here, and it's a summer camp. And this is when all of the flus and viruses were circulating. There was swine flu and bird flu and monkeypox and turtle cooties. Do y'all remember all that? And the thing that happened was this camp, the guy that ran it year-round, kind of my boss, he was terrified that swine flu was going to hit this place. And so they were very careful. They did everything they could and should to keep the place clean. But it happened. And one kid got it somehow, and it just circulated through the camp. A third, including myself, of the children and staff got the flu of some kind. And I am standing on this place where you can kind of just see a lot of the campground. The guy who's in charge of it is standing right here. There's some other staff members, and we're just watching the chaos unfold. There is 2 nurses for the entire, and we're talking about 250 kids, about 100 staff, 2 nurses. They're in this one room, and there's just a line going out the door. We had a quarantine set up over here. There are people walking back and forth who are coughing and sneezing. I heard crying from several people, and it was just terrible. And I turned to him, and I said, you know, this is how every zombie film starts. Am I proud of what I said? Absolutely. When else are you going to get a chance to make a comment like that? Never. That's when. And one of the things that I want to talk about this morning is kind of our responses. This is a verse that many people are familiar with, and I'm going to go ahead and pull it up now. This is from Phillipians 4:13, and there's the link if you want to go there and take a look on your notes and pull those up. But we're going to talk about a very well-known verse of Scripture, and it's basically this. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Looks great in a Hallmark card, looks great on your forearm, but a lot of people jumped into this without understanding the context of the verse and what precisely it is that he is talking about. And the word that we get hung up on is this. Our sticking point is the word everything. Everything? Is he going to give us strength in every single thing that we attempt? What if I'm stalking an old girlfriend? You know, is he going to help me with that? You know, we have to realize that whenever God talks about, and this is very important when it comes to understanding this verse or really any other, when we are trying to understand a verse of Scripture and it's talking about what God provides, whether it's grace, strength, power, success, victory, or strength, what is it exactly that he is referring to, and what are the conditions for that to be met? Okay? What is it exactly, what is it specifically that he's referring to, and what are the conditions for that to be met? And so what I want to do is I just want to kind of break down this verse and talk about it, because what has happened is this. The Apostle Paul, he is speaking to the church in Philippi, and he is saying that I'm glad that you were able to help me, because he received some help from them. And he goes on to explain that I have learned to be able to deal with any situation, and that's key. Any situation, whether I have a lot or I have very little. And so we're going to take a look at that very, very specifically and what it is that he is talking about, okay? So this is the strength that Paul describes. The strength Paul describes is this. It is a spiritual strength from God. It is a spiritual strength, that part is important, from God, and that is important as well, okay? And it is something that he gives to each and every person. Here's a verse of scripture from 2 Corinthians 12:9, and I'll be pulling a lot of verses from 2 Corinthians. It says this, each time he said, this is Paul talking about what God said to him when he was going through a difficult situation. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. And then he also says, we now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God and not from ourselves. So this is about not just material possessions. This isn't financial success or professional victory. This is about a moral fortitude that God provides. And basically, it is not a physical strength or a material success, but an inner moral strength that God provides. Okay? Basically, this is the ability to respond the right way when it is very tempting to respond the wrong way. To respond the right way when it's very, very tempting or enjoyable to respond the wrong way. Many years ago, some of you are familiar with, I think all of you are, you're familiar with our First Impressions ministry. And basically anyone that comes to the church, especially people coming for the first time, we have people there to greet them. And we tell them how to get signed into the children's ministry. We show them their way around. And it's just a great ministry for that, obviously, first impression. And there's a gentleman named Tom. He was standing at one of the doors, like many of them do. And what he was doing was he was just smiling, shaking hands, holding open the door, just like they all do. And a woman walked up, and he said, hey, how are you this morning? Welcome to Spout Springs Church. And he put out his hand. And she looked at his hand and said, I'll pass, and walked around him and went inside. And he came to me later, and you could just see his brain was snapping in half over what had just happened, just how rude she had been. And again, this was a long time ago, not in the current situation. And he was just losing it. And he said, I cannot believe that she responded that way. And I said, well, first of all, you did the right thing by not punching her in the face. And the other thing that you need to realize is this. Very often, hurting people will hurt people and are easily hurt by others. Hurting people hurt people, and they are easily hurt by others. And as I got to know this woman, became familiar with her story and the things that had happened in her life, I came to understand that she had a great deal of pain and a lot of hurt in her life. And he could have very easily said one wrong thing, that she would have turned around, left, and never come back here to church. But during the time that she was here, I believe that we saw her grow, that she became a better disciple, and a lot of good was done. So what we're talking about isn't just, the strength to do all things and to live an enjoyable life, but it's about the circumstances that we run into that are difficult and we respond correctly. Sometimes we'll notice that inner strength in the situation. Sometimes we'll notice it later, okay? But realize that this is about a moral fortitude to make the right call, okay? So, music. That's nice. All right. That's my cue to go to the next point. So let's do this. The strength Paul describes is a spiritual strength from God, and it is provided as we trust him. It is provided as we trust him. It says in Ephesians 1:19 and 20, I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe him. Remember a little while ago I talked about those conditions that have to be met in order for us to receive the things that God promises. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. Here's another verse. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. In fact, some verses will say, beyond our strength. And we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God who raises the dead. And so there's a very real sense and a very real need to trust in God when things get difficult, when things are problematic. And here's the hardest part of this sermon, folks. As I was in my office going over this, I haven't dealt with this to the extent that many people in our world have. People that have been persecuted, people that have been arrested for their beliefs, people, we enjoy many freedoms, and we take many of those freedoms for granted. And so I have not had to endure to the extent that Paul is referring to here. And all I can do is read about it. There's a story of several men who were imprisoned for their beliefs, and they were basically in the same cell together. At any moment, they would be dragged out and beaten. At any moment, they could be dragged out and killed. And they talk about some of the very unique experiences that happened as they were in that prison cell. Well, later, they were freed. They all were let out, or something. There was a change in government or something. And so they're all freed. And very often, they would get together and they would talk about how they missed that time inside the prison cell, because that was when they were closest to God. There's another story of a man, Asian country, again, imprisoned for his beliefs, and he was in a prison camp, and his job, they decided, was his job to clean out the septic tank. And so that's where they sent him. And let me tell you, there were no hoses. He was cleaning out a septic tank. And basically, the guards would send him to go take care of this thing. And of course, if you know anything about septic tanks, like we all do, they're far from everyone else. And so the guards would just send him, and the smell was so awful, the guards wouldn't even get close. And so he would go to the septic tank, and he said, that became my favorite place and my favorite time of day, because I would be there alone. No guards could hear me, and I would sing praises to God as loud as I wanted, and no one would hear me. And again, later after being released, he looked back on that time, and he called that septic tank his temple, and one that he often missed. That is, I haven't been through the situations that allow me to even remotely wrap my head around those situations. And yet, whatever it is that you're going through, whatever it is that you're dealing with, if there are people that can go through that, we are able to go through what we're going through. And I don't think that's a huge step. If God is able to help them, he is certainly able to help us with whatever it is that we may be dealing with. Understand that what we're talking about is trusting that God will do what he said he will do, not what we think he should do. Another thing I'm very guilty of. God, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you taking care of that? Why aren't you doing this other thing? We get into that vending machine mentality of God, I've been praying pretty regularly, I go to church, I drop money in the plate or what have you. Why aren't you taking care of this? I've put the quarter into the machine. Why am I not getting the gumball? Why am I not getting the blessing? And this is where that trust in God is key, because we have to understand that he sees the bigger picture. And is it difficult? Absolutely. But if God is able to help those who have been in those incredible situations, those mind-bending situations, he can certainly help us with whatever it is that we're dealing with. Okay? The strength Paul describes in Philippians 4:13, it is a spiritual strength from God, provided as we trust him, despite the circumstances. Despite the circumstances. Again, a couple of verses. And this is right before Philippians 4:13. This is that context that we were talking about early, just a little while ago. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. Here's another verse much more to the point. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Talked a moment ago about the difficulties that we all deal with, and that is certainly something that this can be applied to. But one of the things that we also see is that we need to make sure, and I'm just going to touch on this very, very briefly because it's one of those things that we can get kind of lost in. But we also need to realize that we are blessed, we must also respond accordingly as well. It is very easy when we have many blessings in our lives to respond in such a way as if God isn't in the picture at all. That the many things that we have somehow come about by our own work. And do we work hard? Yes. And God places responsibilities on us, and he wants us to do certain things. But we also need to realize that the strength to do the work that we do comes from God himself. And it needs to be understood that we cannot allow our blessings and the many things that we enjoy keep us from seeing where all blessings really come from. Because the thing is this, we must manage our blessings or they will manage us. We must manage our blessings, or they will manage us. And while I know this is a very trying time for many of us, one of the things that somebody pointed out is the fact that many of us have homes to stay in with refrigerators full of food, with air conditioning as things start to heat up outside, and the fact that we really are a country that is incredibly blessed when there are many countries who are really suffering right now. We need to realize that those blessings are something that we should be thankful for, but also realize where blessings really come from. So, enough about that. And then last, the strength Paul describes, remember, it is a spiritual strength, not a physical one, not a material one, and it is from God. It is provided as we trust him, despite the circumstances, so that we may respond as a follower of Christ. So that we may respond as a follower of Christ. One of the things that I talk about when I do some of the classes, especially when it comes to serving in a ministry here at Spouse Springs Church. I actually will tell that story about Tom and first impressions and the lady that said that she will pass. And I talk about how it is very important that we always respond in a way that would make Christ proud because we are representing Christ himself. You know, right now, the church has a bit of a branding problem. Have y'all noticed that? There's a lot of stuff out there that's being said that's very negative. And there's a lot of things that's being done that are very positive that people don't hear about. But it's important that we always, regardless of the situation, that we respond the way that Christ would have us do so. In 2 Corinthians 12:10, it says this, "That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." when circumstances overwhelm us, there are certain temptations that we will tend to run into. I've run into this, and I think that many of you have run into it as well. And these are the things, I think these are the real sticking points when it comes to difficult situations, anxiety, worry, whatever spin you want to put on that. These are 3 or 4 points that really become sticking places for us. First of all, when circumstances overwhelm us, we are tempted to trust God less. Again, why God? Why me? Why is this happening? Why aren't you running in? Why aren't you rescuing me? Why aren't you taking care of this? What did I do wrong? What's the lesson? And just all of these things, and please, and this, and this, and this, and why aren't you doing? And you can just fill in the blank. Another sticking point is this. We love people less. Or at the very least, we have less time for them, right? I've got my own problems. I don't have time for yours. You need to just go ahead and take care of your own thing, because if I'm so overwhelmed and wrapped up in what it is that's going on in my life, then basically I just don't have time for you. We become very, very inwardly focused. And that's really a very big temptation as well. When we're overwhelmed, when circumstances overwhelm us, we're also tempted, we are much more open to sin. When we're tired, when we're exhausted, either emotionally or physically or mentally, when we are just simply tired of dealing with the situations that we're dealing with, we will very often look at sin that we know we should not engage in and say, you know what? I deserve this. I deserve this. I've been dealing with all these other things. And it's a very real thing that many people, if not everyone, has dealt with. And finally, when circumstances overwhelm us, the one that I think that it's the hardest to come out of, and I just simply call it, oh, where'd my thing go? Uh-oh. That's not it. That's because I did not put it in there. So let's go back to this one. The fourth one, and I want you to write this one in, I call it the spiral. I call it the spiral. And I have seen this with my own eyes as I'm talking to people multiple times. And if I'm honest, I've been in it several times myself, where you look at the world and or the situation that you're in, and you're just, why is there so much pain? Why is there so much suffering? Why? Why isn't God doing something? Why isn't he stepping in? Why does this take place in Cambodia? Why is this going on in Greece? Why is it that these people, why is there homelessness? Why are there people in poverty? Why are there people that are hungry? And you just kind of sit there and you just spiral and wonder, why is this happening and why isn't God doing something? And you just go around and around and around and around and around and around and you do nothing. And you put all the focus and all the blame outside of yourself as you just kind of just spin mentally going nowhere. And what needs to happen when this takes place, all right, we're all over the place now. So what needs to happen when this takes place, I'm going to get there, folks, I promise. There it is. Our shift needs to go from me to us. Our shift needs to go from me to us. One of the things that happened while I was in Cambodia, and as you know, a few weeks back, I just got back from a trip there. And I've got to be real honest, this is my second trip, and I really felt like, well, I'm just going to be there to do the good that needs to be done. Emotionally, mentally, I'm more prepared for this than last time because I've already done it once, right? I mean, this is old hat in some ways. And for some reason, on this trip, the highs were higher. There were some great things that we saw, but the lows were also lower. And it really messed with me more this time than it did last time. So you kind of have to get kind of in your mind sort of a street map. And you've got this street, Hard Places. The place that we're working with is located here. The hotel that we're staying at is right next door. One street over, just a line of bars. And the next street over as well, a line of bars. And as you walk down that street, you'll see just all of these tables and plastic chairs out in front of every single bar, anywhere from half a dozen to a full dozen girls sitting out front. They're very easy to spot. Tight black dress, makeup and hair done up as if they're headed to prom. And they're there to service any men willing to hire them for the time that they offer. And our group is walking down this street with some of the staff from Hard Places as we're kind of talking about the situation. And as we're walking, there's this little inset, this little spot, maybe no bigger than this stage area, with 2 or 3 chairs and sinks. And there are girls there, again, dressed as they are, getting their hair done, getting their makeup done. And so I asked one of the staff, and I said, so are these little beauty parlors, these little micro beauty parlors, do they just mainly service the girls that sit in front of these bars? And she said, well, yeah, because, after a while, you've been with so many men, you got to get your hair redone, you got to get your makeup redone. I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to go throw up. It's just, it was just one of those mental breaking points. And as we're walking down that street, again, the same evening, I look over and there are these girls. They're dressed differently. They're obviously there for the same reason, but they're dressed differently. They're these bright blue outfits with white trim and this weird scarf around their neck. And I was like, are you sailors? What are you? What are you supposed to be? That's really weird. Do you have one of those weird Halloween stores here in Cambodia? And so I just kind of dismissed it. Literally 3 or 4 days later, we're driving, our group is, and we're in this little vehicle called a tuk-tuk, where basically 2 or 3 will sit on one side, 2 or 3 on the other, and we just kind of face each other and talk. And so we're talking about plans and events and what's happening, what's going to happen. And then I just out of nowhere, I just went, oh my gosh. And my brain just shut off because we had passed a school. And it was the end of the day for the school. It was an all-girls school, and they were all, the 8-year and 10 and 12-year-old girls were coming out of the school wearing that uniform with the bright colors and the white trim. It was a school uniform. And I just, and that there are dark things going on behind the doors of this place. That's why we're there. But there was just something so overwhelming. And let me tell you, it was so overwhelming, and it filled me with such despair. It was almost like, why are we even here? Why are we here? What is the point? It really just hit me, and that was there was about a half a dozen of those moments over the course of the 2 weeks there, where I was just like, I just can't, why are we doing this? And one of the things that I had to do was shift my focus from me, how this is making me feel, and getting out of that spiral, and realizing that I needed to shift from me to us, of us working together to help those who can't help themselves. There are certain stories that pastors tell over and over and over and over and over again, and I would like to share one with you now. There's a story of a boy on a beach, and somehow the tide had just washed up all of these starfish onto the shore. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. an uncountable amount. And the little boy was walking down the beach, and he was just picking up one starfish and just throwing it back in the water. Just one. And he'd pick up another one, and he'd throw it back in. And a man was walking down, and he saw him doing this, just perplexed. Just what a waste of time. It's hopeless. And he walks up to the boy, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And you're just with this condescension in his voice. And the boy said, "I'm picking up, it's pretty obvious, I'm picking up starfish, throwing them back in the water." And he said, "There is absolutely no way that you can help all of these starfish. You're not making a difference at all. Why don't you just stop?" And the boy picks up one starfish, and he says, "It makes a difference to this one." And he threw it back in the water. One of the things that, even little things like, they have a baby house, hard places. When a baby is abandoned, they will, if they have room, if the baby house has room, they'll take the baby to them and they'll tend to it and take care of it. Right now, they're taking care of 5 out of thousands. And one of the things that I had to remind myself of is, well, they're making a difference in those 5. And because of the way that Hard Places does things, I know that they will make a difference in such a way that those children will grow up in such a way that they will in turn make a difference for others. I know that if we shift from me to us, from it's hopeless to we're going to provide hope for as many as we can, we're going to do for a few what we wish we could do for everyone. Soon it'll be 6. And then 10 and 12 and 24 and so forth. And those circumstances that Paul was talking about, there's an incredible verse at one point where he says, "I'm so glad that you were able to help me, not just because I wanted something, not because I was sad and depressed, but because of the benefit that you will receive as you learn to help others." And it is that I'm most excited about. As we deal with all the many things that we are dealing with, because, those temptations are real. Temptation to just, God's not in the picture anymore. I don't have time for others. The sin looks really enticing. And that spiral of what's the point? We need to realize that we must continually shift from me to us, from just me to others. Because that's what God did, and that's what he did for us through his son, Jesus Christ. And it was the ultimate sacrifice, where he went from just me to us, so that grace could be provided for anyone and everyone who asks. And one of the things that, as I was speaking to just a few staff in Greece and the Hard Places community that they have there and what they're trying to attempt, and the people in Cambodia. And let me just back up just a little bit, because one of the things that is I find really interesting is that we'll talk to people and we'll say, "Hey, Cambodia trip is coming up. You know the situation. What do you think?" And they'll say, "Oh, I couldn't go there." "Oh, really? How come?" "Well, I would just kill everyone that had ever touched a child the wrong way." And I was like, "Yeah, that's not what we're looking for. Murder isn't really the slant that we're putting on this. Tempting, but thanks." And one of the things that I talk about when we talk to the team that is going over, and we talk to the staff, and if we ever get the opportunity to talk to people that are new coming onto staff at Hard Places, is that your understanding of grace is going to be tested more than it ever has been. Phillipians put it really well. He said the people that have the hardest time with grace very often are Christians themselves. And part of that focus of from me to us is also the sharing of that grace with others, making sure that they really understand it and that we're extending that. Because when Christ died, he didn't share it just for me. He shared it for me so that it will flow through me to others. And that's really where the ultimate from me to us takes place, is as we are sharing the grace and the love of Jesus Christ with those around us. One of the things that we do offer here at Spouse Springs Church, and we do this every week, we show off our blue bag, and we let you know that if you're at all interested in accepting Christ as your Savior, to come pick one of these up. Obviously, that's a little bit more difficult right now. So if that's something that you're at all interested in, please contact Steve at spousesprings.org, S-T-E-V-E, Steve at spousesprings.org, and he can talk you through that. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and ask the band if they'll come on back up. But I hope that you'll take some time during what is decidedly a very difficult, a very surreal, and very abnormal time. But there is a very normal way that Christians are supposed to respond. And that is to show love and grace to those around us, to think less about ourselves and to think more about others. And so that's my challenge to you this week. What is a way that even though we are isolated, even though that we are confined, what is a way that you can reach out to someone in need? What is a way that you can just show some love, some compassion, some encouragement to someone that may need it? And be willing, because this is the big deal, being willing to pray, God, make me aware of someone who needs it. If you pray that prayer and you mean it, he will answer it. He will show you someone that you can reach out to. It will come at a time that's often inconvenient to you. But I guarantee you this is a prime time to be doing that very thing. Because again, the strength that Paul is talking about, it's a spiritual strength. It's not the kind of strength that makes us look successful and victorious and glamorous in the eyes of others. It is a strength to persevere, to respond accordingly, and to do the right thing. Ask God, what is it that you would have me do to put that into practice this week?